How's it going, guys? This is J Sweels hollering out at you with a new video. So today I'm basically re-recording a video that I had recorded a few weeks ago talking about getting started in learning Indonesian. So, basically what I want to talk about in this video is just my recommendations for, getting started with Indonesian, I'm going to recommend, things that I would improve on from my experience, just basically just giving you a starting video, and I'll probably talk more. This video will probably kind of give like a general plan for you that I would recommend in studying it, getting past beginner and the intermediate. I can't say anything for upper intermediate or advanced Indonesian because I'm not even at that part yet, and I don't really want to make this video as if to show that I'm eligible to be an Indonesian teacher or anything, because I'm not. But basically it's more of a video just me giving tips, and just being able to share what I would suggest you do, what I think could help you. So if you're new to Indonesian, and I'm going to kind of talk about this as if you have little or no knowledge of Indonesian already, because I may state things that are kind of, for many, might be very obvious. Before I do get into this video, I do want to make a quick shout out. So I have a friend from Indonesia named Windah, and she does a podcast in Indonesian. It's geared for levels such as low levels, medium levels, and high levels. And I would really recommend you watch her podcast if you're wanting to work on your listening or comprehension. She just does videos on different topics, such as, places in the world, Indonesian culture, or food, or things like that. And, I've listened to it quite a bit, and, it's just been really nice. I've learned words from it. I feel like it's helped me just to comprehend. She speaks really clearly, and I think it's a really good quality podcast. So I'll leave the link to her podcast in the description. She's on Spotify and YouTube and probably other things as well, so I'll link both of those. But if that's somewhere where you just want to start practicing immersing in Indonesian, then I definitely recommend her podcast. She's kind of the one who kind of got me into uploading again, so I wanted to shout her out for that. But anyways, so I'm going to start talking about like the basics of Indonesian now. So Indonesian, is, if I'm right, it kind of came from the Malay language. Both Malay and Indonesian, there's a pretty good degree of mutual intelligibility. So if you learn one, it's not going to be very hard to learn the thing or the nuances or the things that are different in the other. And you'll be able to pretty much converse with people from either country depending on which you choose. But this is going to be more about Indonesian. So Indonesian, it's a fairly, I would say, simple language. It's the first one I studied seriously, and there's many things I could be doing to make it better. But so what I would say in Indonesian, like, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the grammar. I don't want this just to be grammatically focused, but Indonesian, there's many grammatical features that it doesn't have, which many other languages do have. Some of these being verb conjugation, or grammatical gender, a lot of these things. And for you who are wanting to learn this language, it's going to be a big help for you because it's going to make learning it all that more simple. So I'll kind of touch on these a little bit. So there's a lot of words in Indonesian which are going to change their meaning based on prefixes and suffixes. And I'll try and give an example. One I usually use is the word mine, M-A-I-N. And mine, is basically the word for play. If I look at someone and tell them, say mine, I'm telling them to play. But from this word, we can create other meanings, So if we add the letters B-E-R to the beginning of it to make bermain, and that's another thing, you'll roll your R's in Indonesian. Bermain would mean play, as in the verb to play. if we take the verb off, we add pa to it to make pemain, that means player. It makes it into a person. If we take that off, then we add the suffix an to it, we'd have mine on, which means toy. So I'm not going to go through all of these, that's just some of them. But this shows you, just, how it works, a lot of words in Indonesian are just going to be made by adding all these different prefixes and suffixes, and it can be a little confusing at first, but I think one of the best things is just, I think it helps us to have it well explained. Once it's kind of explained to me well, some of these prefixes and suffixes, weren't super hard for me to get a hold of or a grasp of. And, to talk about verbs, in terms of conjugation, there isn't conjugations in Indonesian, so, if you studied Spanish, for example, like if we take the word, the Spanish word for have, if I wanted to say I have, it'd be tengo. If I wanted to say you have, it'd be tienes, so the ending of, which that's an irregular verb too, but, basically, it's going the verb's going to change, have a stem change, or it's going to change in general depending on who's doing the action or who the verb relates to. But thankfully in Indonesian, that's not something you're going to have to worry about. The verb will stay the same for whoever's doing it. And basically, so if we're going to do the word have in Indonesian, it's going to basically be the same, for example, the word for have in Indonesian would be punya. Punya would mean have. So if I want to say I have, it'd be, there's different words for I in Indonesian. There's saya and aku if we're talking about formal. And I'll talk about that later maybe, but, for sake, I'll use the most formal word, saya. If I want to say I have, it'd be saya punya. And if I want to say have, you have, it'd be kamu punya. Punya isn't going to change. It's going to stay the same for whoever you're talking about. And thankfully, the other verbs are going to be the same, it's going to stay the same, so you're not going to have to worry about that. Then also, there's not grammatical gender, so, in Indonesian, they don't have words for he or she, it's just dia. So you'll infer from context if the person's talking about a man or a woman. And of course, you can ask things, to get clarification on who they're referring to. And, if you're new to languages like this, it may sound a little challenging or tricky, but it's not. And verbs, or talking about the tense of a verb, will be the same too. So there isn't a past tense of the verb for try, or, well, kind of there is, but, usually if you're wanting to use the word try, you'll say mencoba. There's the D prefix, which is kind of like a past tense, but, usually, let me think of another example, usually, if you want to talk about something like in the past tense, a common word you'll see is suda, or in informal they'll say uda, but, suda is kind of loosely, you can translate it as already, but I don't know if that's really a good way to look at it. Really, suda just shows something's already happened, or that you've already did something. So if I wanted to say, let me think of an example sentence. I'm buying rice. If I want to say I'm buying rice, it'd be saya membeli nasi. But if I want to talk about it in the past tense, I could just say, or if I want to say I bought rice, I could just say aku sudah membeli nasi, and that just shows that I've done that already. So for future tense, it'll be the same thing, just different words, and there's different ways you can show when something's happening. You don't just have to do it this way, but akan means will in Indonesian, so take our example sentence, if we want to take the sentence I bought rice, and make it mean I will buy rice. We just replace pseudo with akan, so it becomes saya akan membeli nasi. And it's really simple. And once you get some of these words, we can even add on to it words like besok, which would be tomorrow. Saya akan membeli nasi besok. And it just makes it easier. And really, the most challenging part of Indonesian grammar is just getting your mind wrapped around on how these suffixes and prefixes work. I'm starting to understand it more. A lot of it's just finding good explanations of it. And the harder part of Indonesian is going to be once again the more informal things. There's some words in Indonesian that don't necessarily translate into English, and it takes a little bit of practice and exposure just to get your mind wrapped around. This word is kind of debated. Yang was a word that confused me for a bit, and you'll kind of, once you see it used more, you'll kind of just have this, for me it's like an instinct, or when they use it, I may use it wrong sometimes, but I kind of get it. And yang can kind of roughly be translated as which or that, but it's kind of more just, I guess you could say it's like a specifier. But anyways, but Indonesian, the grammar, it's the same sentence structure as English. You're not gonna have to worry about SOV or anything like that. So that doesn't mean I'm not saying translate directly from English into Indonesian. It's a good point. In English, we'll use the word have, not just for possessive uses, like I have a ball, like we use it like I have to go or I have to work now. But you can't say in Indonesian aku punya ke. It didn't work like that because punya just means it's just a possessive word. It shows that you own something. So, pretty much, that is one thing, that you just have to learn. Not every, sometimes it'll work, but you can't just always translate directly from English in the Indonesian or what other language you speak. Usually it won't always work, and I've gotten by doing it. Most of the time I probably still struggle with that just because I don't know of the right natural way of saying everything in Indonesian. But some of these things I've just learned from talking, and so like I said, a big part of studying Indonesian, I think, for you is going to be just exposure, and getting some of these grammatical things down. I know I usually tend to, especially now, I usually say don't worry about grammar, but I think in Indonesian, if you can kind of get these grammatical things understood even early on, it will just kind of help later on, because if you understand how the prefixes work, it'll help you to, assuming you know what the root word is, it'll help you to know, what you can kind of infer the meaning of some words, and that's one thing. The longer you study the Indonesian, it'll get easier over time. And another good thing is, because Indonesian grammar isn't as complex, especially lacking conjugations, it's ranked, I can't remember the name of the scale, but there's a scale that shows how long it takes to learn certain languages, and Indonesian is ranked at about 900 hours, classroom hours, I believe. And the good thing is, it's 250 hours more than they say it'd take to learn Spanish. The good thing about it, though, is that, with a smaller vocabulary in Indonesian, it'll take you further. So I don't have any clue as to how much I know in Indonesian now. And I'm not going to try and guess, but, I'll say it's somewhere around the 1,000 mark, maybe lower, maybe a little more, and I'm guessing a little less. But, with that, honestly, once it gets to the point where you're wanting to talk about different subjects, you're going to have trouble. But with that, that's been enough to where I've been able to talk some in Indonesian, and have, honestly, I've had to translate some, but it's made talking in Indonesian a lot more, especially if they're speaking formally with you. I wouldn't say worry about the informal at the beginning. Some people are going to want to use informal with you just because for them it's kind of weird to speak in really formal Indonesian. But, I think if you'll just, I think it'll help you just to not so much worry about that and just get the basics down, for any language you're learning. And, I would say, like, it might not help you as much at the beginning, but eventually it's helped me, just to put what I learned into practice, just to meet, whether in person or online, just meet with people who you can speak it with. I do more texting than I do speaking, but, that'll help you. Just, I've learned, there's been people who've kind of taught me words, and things like that, and I would say, for me, it helped me just to find a good app to get me used to it. For me, the biggest one that I used was Duolingo. That got me used to making sentences and things like that. And it's a good help. It gets you basic vocabulary, but I'll say don't rely on that, because Duolingo is not going to teach you a lot of critical things at first. Like, it takes you quite a few lessons just to learn basic sentence words, like if, or, so I would say just use Duolingo as a supplement to your studies. Don't make it all that you use. If you can find the content, try and find like some basic, try and find some content in Indonesian, that you can watch and take down words from that you don't know, or just anything like that, and I think that'll boost your language learning. Also, I recommend try to I recommend, it may not, I think it'll help you at any point of study. If you use Anki, for example, I think Anki will help you. It'll just be another source of input, because I always say those apps are really, most of the time they're not varied in the words they teach you. It's just a straight line. And if you can find things to read, that's one of the struggles with me in Indonesian, is finding stuff to read, because in this level where I'm at, it's hard to find things that aren't overly easy, and it's hard to find things that aren't overly advanced either. Like I tried reading a sports article in Indonesian, and I didn't understand hardly much, except for just some basic stuff. And, so I suggest trying to find, like, for you, it'll be easier to find beginner material, but I suggest once you can, trying to get to the point where, you're finding a good way to get input of vocabulary, especially varied input, that's going to be more efficient than just going through levels on an app. The app will teach you the basics of making these sentences, and if you can find cards with if you can find sentence cards, that'll be better. But good thing about Indonesian is, once you get to the point where you understand the grammar, you'll kind of have an idea of where certain things will go in a sentence. So for me right now, like I said, there's still things I need to learn, but it'll be easier for me to be able to, it's easier for me to know how to use words that I learned, because I know how they work. So, there's nuances of Indonesian, or in Indonesian and Malay, just as there are in any other language. Like, one of the first ones I noticed, and this is where immersion is going to be important, where you watch things to learn how people express their thoughts in Indonesian. Like, one example would be the phrase dengan cepat, and you can correct me if you're native Indonesian, because I may be using this wrong, but an example of that I would say is like, and I'll translate it into English after, like if I wanted to say in Indonesian, saya belajar bahasa Indonesia dengan cepat, that would kind of roughly translate to I learn Indonesian quickly, and to kind of break that down, like I know that may be a new sentence for you. Saya is I, belajar bahasa Indonesia is learn Indonesian, or literally learn Indonesian language. And then dengan cepat would mean quickly, but technically and literally in their language that means like dengan is with, and then cepat is like fast. So literally it's kind of a little similar to dengan, or with fast, or something, or with fastness or something like that maybe, but well, fastness wouldn't work, but you get the idea. And for us, as I'm assuming you're an English speaker, you may come from somewhere else, so I'm not trying to generalize, but for us as native English speakers, if we said that in our language, that'd be kind of odd for us. But that's just one of the things in Indonesian that may just be bad translation on my part. I can't think of any other way of translating that, but it's just something that takes getting used to, and just that's something I've noticed just from talking to native Indonesians, is just they'll say something like, kind of sometimes like, in English we'll say, like, if we ask a question, or if we answer somebody's question, we'll say and you, like we'll say, like somebody asks how we are, we'll say, oh, I'm good, and you. And you can do that in Indonesian, they'll still work, but sometimes they'll say kalau kamu, which means if you, and that's just another thing, for us it's kind of odd, but for them it's just one of their ways of talking, and it's going to be like that in any language you learn, Japanese or Spanish or any of those. So that's where immersion is going to help you a lot in any language you're learning. I think immersion is just going to be a part you need to do. And I just suggest try, whatever language you're learning, try and find a good efficient method, and try and be balanced. I may even write it down in the comments to kind of summarize the things that I think you should do, just to make it easier, since this is a long video. Like, to kind of wrap it up in a nutshell, find a good efficient method of learning vocabulary, something that's not too slow. Then you can use Duolingo or something, just to learn the basics of sentence structure and grammar. Try and find, like, if you're trying to learn the prefixes and all those things, try and find good explanations that you can understand, because for me, I never understood, like, I knew if you, like the example earlier, like bermain, like meaning to play, like, like, it took me a while to understand what's the difference in saying that and just saying mine, and part of that's in informal Indonesian, they tend to drop that, they won't add that prefix to it, so sometimes they'll use the word mine, just as, even though usually that would kind of be more of a command, I think, they'll drop the the verb prefix, and they'll use that, they'll just use the root word, in place of the verb. So if you're talking more informally, you can do that, but, if you're talking, I suggest learning these prefixes, though. It's better to learn the formal, register the language first, and then worry about speaking more informal. And that'll help too, because, part of that's probably because of my temptation to speak English, or to translate from English in the Indonesian. Some sentences can kind of turn or become long-winded, and probably that's just because of the lack of immersion from it for me. And so I just recommend find like these different ways you can just be improving it. Find a good method of learning vocab you may try and memorize. Memorize isn't too bad. I've learned from it too, and it can just be another thing. And just fun, like immerse, like I said, I suggest listening to my friend's podcast. You can start out the lower. You can start out with some of the things that she made for people who have a lower level in Indonesian. And the good thing about hers is, I'm just guessing, I could be wrong, but in her podcast, she seems to kind of follow more of this, like, I don't know if it'd be so much comprehensive immersion as it is just, the thing I like about hers is, like, it's not like these really long stories that she does, like, she does some of her episodes is talking about slang, and, like, the thing I like about it, it's kind of comprehensive, but, she doesn't teach Indonesian in English, she teaches it in Indonesian, so if she's wanting, like, she very rarely dips into English, there may have been a time or two, but, if she's wanting to describe a word in Indonesian, like a slang word, she didn't go into English and say, oh, this word means to, I don't know, I'm not going to make an example, but, she explains it in Indonesian. It's kind of like when people recommend, once you can, switching to a monolingual dictionary, like when you get to a good enough level to where you can understand a word, or when you get to a good enough level to where you can read dictionaries, people recommend reading or using the dictionary for that country, that's describing every word with that language. And I haven't tried that with Indonesian in a while just because I don't usually use dictionaries, but I think that's a really good method she uses, and I've learned words from context, like, it's helpful to learn, just words in context, and, if you understand, like, my Indonesian, like, most of her podcasts I can understand probably 60 to 70, 80% of it, and that just helps me, because most of the time there's sentences, there'll be sentences where I don't really, maybe I don't know, or maybe I understand most of it, and that one word I don't know from the context, and I can kind of guess and double check in a translator or dictionary what it means. And she uses a lot of repetition too, which I think is good. Like, she doesn't tell like as contrasted with like a movie or TV show where you're watching the whole thing for an hour, where there's probably not going to be much repetition. What she does is, she has a story or topic, she talks about it, then instead of like just keep going on and on, about this topic, she makes it to where she repeats the story, and that gives you a second chance to pick up on things you didn't listen to, or things that you didn't understand, or things like that. And I think that's just a really good approach she's using to learn Indonesian or teach Indonesian, and it's really helping you in multiple areas. You're gaining vocabulary from the words you don't understand. You're learning, once you get to that point, you're learning informal slang and things like that. There's even she did a couple special episodes where she speaks with someone on a certain topic, and that's good because it's going to be at a faster rate and things. So like I said, I'll link her content in the description below, and I highly suggest checking it out and supporting her. Of course, we both have school, so both of us are kind of limited on what we can upload right now, but so I just suggest coming back to the main topic, just finding the most efficient way for you to learn the language, and keep seeking if there's other ways to be more efficient. Really, one thing I would suggest is just look at your own progress over the months, try writing or speaking once you can, I know I'm not going to say that you have to do that because I'm still studying whether or not, even with a more simple language like Indonesian, Indonesian, it may benefit you more to start trying to put yourself in the way of native speakers because it's really hard for me to find content in Indonesian, so that might be an exception, but just try and find a bunch of input. I think that'll be one of the best things, because once you get that basic foundation of knowledge of Indonesian grammar, then from there, a lot of it's just, there may be small grammatical things that you'll have to learn, but it'll just, a lot of it's going to turn into just building your vocabulary, and that's something I just really suggest. So I'm going to wrap up the video, link everything I talked about. I may link some helpful channels or things, or I don't know, a lot of this will be in the description or comment section. I'll link things that I've used, that can help you. And I may do more topical videos on it in Indonesian in the future, like certain prefixes or things like that, just to clarify things. And part of that will be as soon as I learn it too, because there's some things I'm still learning. But hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully I didn't bore you or anything. And hopefully, you found it helpful, and I highly suggest, of course, you can check and make sure what I've recommended is right. I could be wrong on things, but this is things that I think would have helped me had I put it into practice. And I just highly recommend, that you, of course, find what works for you, but, these are things that I think would help you in your progress. Anyways, that's about all I had to say on it, and I'll catch you next time.